When struggling bookshop owner Amelia meets the mysterious billionaire Dominic, she thinks her financial troubles might finally be over. But some deals come with a price higher than money can measure. Hello, beautiful souls. Tonight's story will take you on a journey where hearts are tested and destinies collide. The journey starts now. The morning rain painted silver streaks across the windows of Pages and Dreams bookshop. Amelia pressed her palm against the cold glass, watching droplets race toward the sill as her breath fogged the surface. The scent of aged paper and brewing coffee filled the cramped space that had become both her sanctuary and her prison. At 25, she carried herself with quiet dignity, despite the weight of 3 years' worth of mounting bills. Her auburn hair caught the dim light filtering through rain-soaked windows, and her green eyes held stories of sleepless nights spent choosing between heating and electricity. The brass bell chimed, announcing her first customer in 2 days. Amelia turned, expecting to see Mrs. Patterson browsing for her weekly romance novel, but instead found herself staring at a man who seemed to belong in a different world entirely. He stood, silhouetted against the gray morning, rainwater glistening on his charcoal coat. Tall and imposing, he moved with the controlled grace of someone accustomed to commanding attention. His dark hair was damp from the rain, and when he looked up, his blue eyes held an intensity that made her pulse skip. "Good morning," she managed, her voice steadier than her suddenly trembling hands. "Can I help you find something?" His gaze swept across her bookshop with genuine appreciation, taking in the handwritten recommendation cards tucked between volumes, the threadbare reading chair in the corner, the precarious stacks that testified to her inability to part with even the most damaged books. "I'm looking for first edition poetry," he said, his voice carrying traces of an accent she couldn't place. "Romantic poets, 19th century?" Amelia felt something flutter in her chest. Poetry lovers were extinct in her experience, replaced by customers seeking bestsellers and self-help guides. "You've come to the right place," she said, leading him toward the back corner where her grandmother's most precious volumes resided. "These were my grandmother's personal collection." She reached for a leather-bound volume of Byron's work, acutely aware of how close he stood, how the subtle scent of his cologne mixed with something uniquely masculine. "This is an 1812 first edition of Childe Harold's Pilgrimage," she said, carefully opening the book. "The binding is original." Their fingers brushed as he took the volume, and the contact sent electricity racing up her arm. She watched him examine the book with reverence, his long fingers gentle on the aged pages. "Your grandmother had exquisite taste," he murmured, looking up to fix those penetrating blue eyes on her face. "What would my choice tell you about me?" The question caught her off guard. She studied his face, noting the intelligence in his eyes, the slight lines that suggested he smiled often, and something else beneath the polished exterior, a loneliness that she recognized, because she saw it in her own mirror every morning. "You're someone who appreciates beauty that can't be measured in money," she said softly. A shadow crossed his features so quickly she almost missed it. "That's a generous assessment," he said, his voice rougher now. "I'm Dominic, by the way." Amelia. For the next hour, they moved through her collection together. She found herself sharing stories about the books, their origins, their previous owners. He listened with genuine interest, asking questions that revealed a depth of knowledge that surprised her. As she rang up his 6-volume purchase at the front counter, she noticed his gaze drift to the stack of overdue bills partially hidden beneath her register. Heat flooded her cheeks. "Every small business faces challenges," she said, lifting her chin with what she hoped looked like confidence rather than desperation. Dominic reached into his jacket and withdrew a business card, placing it beside his payment. "I represent several private collectors who are always looking for quality rare books. If you're interested in expanding beyond retail, ... double quotes, he left the sentence hanging as he gathered his purchases. At the door, he turned back, his blue eyes intense and unreadable. "Some opportunities only come once, Amelia. Don't let pride cost you everything." The bell chimed as he disappeared into the rain, leaving her staring at the card in her trembling fingers. The embossed lettering read, "Lackwood Acquisitions," followed by a phone number that felt like both salvation and damnation. 3 days later, Amelia stood before the towering glass facade of Blackwood Acquisitions. The business card crumpled in her sweaty palm. The building stretched toward gray clouds like a monument to wealth she couldn't fathom, its sleek surfaces reflecting her small, uncertain figure. The elevator rose silently to the 40th floor, carrying her toward a decision that felt both inevitable and terrifying. When the doors opened, she stepped into a world of marble and mahogany, where even the air seemed expensive. Ms. Chen. A receptionist with a smile sharp as cut crystal gestured toward ornate double doors. Mr. Blackwood is waiting. The office beyond those doors stole her breath. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the city that made her bookshop seem like a dollhouse. Dominic stood with his back to her, silhouetted against the panorama, his hands clasped behind him. "You came," he said without turning around. "I'm 3 months behind on rent," she replied, her honesty cutting through the formal atmosphere like a blade. "Pride doesn't pay bills." He turned then, and she saw something flicker across his face. Relief? Disappointment? Before she could decipher it, his expression smoothed into professional neutrality. "Please, sit." He gestured to a chair that probably cost more than her monthly revenue. "Can I offer you something? Coffee? Water? Just tell me what you want from me." Dominic moved to his desk, withdrawing a manila folder thick with documents. "I have a client who collects rare manuscripts. He's particularly interested in a specific item, and I believe you might have access to it." "What kind of item?" "Your grandmother's personal journal from 1943. She would have been about 20 then." Living in London during the war, Amelia felt the blood drain from her face. "How do you know about that?" "My client is very thorough in his research." Dominic's voice remained steady, but she caught something darker in his eyes. "The journal contains information about a collection of manuscripts that were hidden during the Blitz, manuscripts that have never been recovered. And you think my grandmother knew where they were. I think she was part of the group that hid them." He slid the folder across his desk. "There's $100,000 in that contract, Amelia. Enough to save your shop and give you a fresh start." Her hands shook as she opened the folder. The numbers swam before her eyes, more money than she'd ever seen in one place. But something cold settled in her stomach as she read the terms. "This says I have to provide exclusive access to all of my grandmother's personal papers. Everything. It's standard language." "No," she looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "This isn't about buying information. This is about buying me." Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Finally, Dominic leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since she'd met him, his polished facade cracked. "My client doesn't accept partial cooperation," he said quietly. "It's all or nothing, Amelia. And nothing means you lose everything in 2 weeks when the bank forecloses." "How do you know about the foreclosure?" His jaw tightened. "Because I make it my business to know everything about the people I work with, the people you manipulate." "You mean," she stood, clutching the folder like a shield. "You orchestrated this whole thing. The poetry, the charm. Making me think you actually cared about books? That wasn't fake." The words came out rougher than he intended. She saw something raw flash in his blue eyes. "Whatever else this is, that wasn't fake. But this is." She gestured at the contract. At the opulent office, at the carefully constructed web he'd drawn around her. "You're asking me to betray my grandmother's memory for money? I'm asking you to survive." He stood as well, moving around the desk toward her. "Your grandmother is dead, Amelia. But you're still here, and you're drowning, so you throw me a rope with a noose at the end. I throw you the only lifeline available." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Sign the contract. Take the money. Find a way to live with what you have to do." She stared at him, this beautiful, broken man who'd appeared in her shop like salvation and revealed himself as something far more complicated. In his eyes, she saw the same desperation she felt, the same terrible need wrapped in expensive clothes and pretty words. "I need time to think. You have until tomorrow night. My client expects an answer by then." At the door, she turned back one last time. "What happens if I say no?" Dominic's expression went carefully blank. "Then I find another way to get what he wants. And you lose everything anyway." The words followed her into the elevator, down 40 floors, and into the rain-soaked streets where her small, failing world waited for her decision. Amelia spent the night in her grandmother's attic, surrounded by dust-covered boxes and the ghosts of a life she'd never fully understood. The journal sat before her like an accusation, its leather cover worn smooth by decades of handling. She opened it with trembling fingers, and her grandmother's careful script filled the yellowed pages. But as she read, the story that emerged wasn't the one she'd expected. March 15th, 1943, they came for the Blackwood collection today. Father managed to hide the most valuable pieces before the soldiers arrived, but Edmund saw us. I pray he keeps his silence. March 20th, 1943, Edmund Blackwood visited again. He knows about the manuscripts hidden in the church crypt. He says he won't tell the authorities if I help him recover them after the war. I told him, some things are worth more than survival. March 25th, 1943, Edmund's son was born today. A beautiful boy with his father's dark hair and storm-blue eyes. Perhaps there is hope for redemption in the next generation. Amelia's hands shook as she turned the pages, pieces of a 70-year-old puzzle clicking into place. Her grandmother hadn't just known about the hidden manuscripts. She'd been in love with Edmund Blackwood, the man who'd tried to steal them. The rain had stopped by dawn, leaving the world washed clean and gleaming. Amelia stood in her empty bookshop, the journal clutched to her chest, when the bell chimed. Dominic entered, his usual composure cracked around the edges. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his hair looked like he'd run his hands through it repeatedly. "You read it," he said, his voice hollow. "Your grandfather," she whispered. "Edmund Blackwood, and your grandmother broke his heart." He moved closer, and she could see the pain etched in every line of his face. She chose duty over love, and he spent the rest of his life trying to get those manuscripts back. "So you decided to finish what he started?" "I decided to save the family business he built from his obsession." Dominic's laugh was bitter. "Do you know what it's like growing up in the shadow of a man who loved a woman more than his own family? Who spent every penny searching for artifacts that represented the one person who wouldn't choose him? And now you're doing the same thing." "No." His voice turned fierce. "I'm ending it. Those manuscripts are worth $50 million, Amelia. Enough to pay off the company's debts and start fresh. No more chasing ghosts." She studied his face, seeing past the polished exterior to the wounded boy beneath. "What aren't you telling me?" Silence stretched between them like a chasm. Finally he spoke, his words barely audible. "The client I mentioned? There is no client. It's just me. Trying to save a company that's been bleeding money for decades, while my grandfather chased a dead woman's secrets. You lied to me. I lead to everyone." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his blue eyes, including myself. "I told myself this was business, that you were just another transaction. But the truth is, I started falling for you the moment you talked about books being windows to the soul." "Don't." She backed away. The journal pressed against her heart like armor. "Don't make this about feelings when you're asking me to betray everything my grandmother believed." "And your grandmother chose love once before, Amelia. She chose it over money, over security, over everything my grandfather offered her. And maybe she was right, but look where it got her. She died poor and alone, leaving you to struggle with the consequences. She died with her integrity intact. Integrity doesn't pay rent." The words hung between them like a slap. Amelia felt tears threaten, but she refused to let them fall. Instead, she walked to the shelf where her grandmother's most precious volumes were kept, and withdrew a small, leather-bound notebook. "There's more," she said quietly. "A second journal, from after the war." Dominic went still. "What does it say?" "That she never stopped loving your grandfather. But she also never told him where the manuscripts were hidden because she knew what kind of man he was. Becoming, obsessed, dangerous." Reading from the final entry, "Edmund came again today with his son. The boy has his father's eyes, but a gentler soul. I pray the curse of this obsession dies with Edmund, that the next generation finds peace." When she looked up, Dominic's face had gone pale. "She was protecting me?" She was protecting everyone. Amelia closed the journal. The manuscripts aren't lost, Dominic. They were destroyed in 1955. My grandmother burned them all, rather than let them consume another generation. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Dominic laughed, a sound devoid of humor that echoed off the bookshop walls. 50 years of searching for ash and memory, he ran his hands through his hair. My grandfather died believing they were still out there somewhere. And now, you know the truth. Now I know I've destroyed everything for nothing. He looked at her with eyes full of devastation. The company will collapse within months, and I've lost the only thing that actually mattered. What do you mean? But before he could answer, the bell chimed again, and 3 men in dark suits entered the bookshop. Their leader, a man with silver hair and cold eyes, surveyed the cramped space with obvious disdain. "Mr. Blackwood," he said, his voice carrying a slight accent, "I trust you have good news for me." Amelia felt ice form in her veins as she realized the terrible truth. There had been a client all along. The temperature in the bookshop seemed to drop 10 degrees as the silver-haired man stepped closer. His companions flanked the door like sentries, their presence transforming Amelia's sanctuary into a trap. "Victor Petrov," Dominic said. "You weren't supposed to arrive until tonight. Plans change." Petrov's cold eyes fixed on Amelia, studying her like a specimen under glass. "This is the grandmother's heir." "Amelia Chen," she said, lifting her chin despite the fear crawling up her spine. "And you are?" "A collector of historical artifacts." Petrov's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Mr. Blackwood has promised me access to certain wartime manuscripts. I trust there won't be any complications." Amelia glanced at Dominic, seeing the tension radiating from every line of his body. Whatever game he'd been playing, it had just become infinitely more dangerous. "There might be a slight delay," Dominic began. But Petrov cut him off with a gesture. "There will be no delays. I have invested considerable resources in this acquisition, Mr. Blackwood. My patience has limits. The manuscripts were destroyed," Amelia said suddenly, her voice cutting through the thick atmosphere. "In 1955, there's nothing left to find." Petrov's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his pale eyes. "How unfortunate. However, I've learned never to trust initial reports. People have such creative ways of hiding treasures." One of his men stepped forward, and Amelia saw the bulge of a weapon beneath his jacket. Fear spiked through her, but it was quickly replaced by a burning anger at the violation of her space, her grandmother's memory, her entire world. "Get out," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Get out of my shop." "I'm afraid that's not possible," Petrov replied. "You see, Mr. Blackwood here has accumulated quite substantial debts to my organization. The manuscripts were intended as payment." Amelia spun to face Dominic, seeing the truth written in his anguished expression. "You borrowed money from him?" "My grandfather's debts," Dominic said hoarsely. "When I inherited the company, I inherited everything, including loans from people you don't walk away from." "How much?" $3 million. The number hit her like a physical blow. She staggered back against the bookshelf, volumes of poetry and prose pressing against her spine like accusations. "So when you came into my shop, when you pretended to care about books, about me," her voice cracked, but she forced herself to continue. "It was all a lie. You were just looking for collateral." "No." Dominic stepped toward her, but she held up a hand to stop him. "It started that way, but everything between us became real. I swear to you, Amelia, everything we shared was real. Real enough to sell me to a criminal." "Enough." Petrov's voice cracked like a whip. "This melodrama is tedious. Miss Chen, you will accompany my associates while we conduct a thorough search of these premises. If the manuscripts are truly gone, then you and Mr. Blackwood will need to discuss alternative arrangements." "Alternative arrangements?" Amelia's voice rose. "What kind of alternative arrangements?" Petrov's smile was arctic. "People who cannot pay their debts with money often find other ways to be useful. You own property. You have connections in the rare book trade. You have value beyond these moldering volumes." Understanding crashed over her like a wave. They weren't just going to search her shop. They were going to take everything. Her business, her freedom, possibly her life. "There's another option," Dominic said suddenly. Every eye in the room turned to him. The manuscripts weren't the only valuable items hidden during the war. There were also gold coins, jewelry, artwork. Small pieces that could have been overlooked. Petrov raised an eyebrow. "Go on, give me 1 week. Let me search the locations mentioned in the journals. If I can recover enough artifacts to cover the debt, you leave Amelia out of this completely. And if you fail, then you have 2 debtors instead of 1. Amelia stared at Dominic in horror. "Don't you dare sacrifice yourself for my mistakes." "They're not your mistakes," he said fiercely. "They're mine. My family's, and I'm the one who has to fix them." Petrov considered the proposal, his pale eyes moving between them like a predator weighing his options. Finally, he nodded. "Double quotes, 1 week, Mr. Blackwood, but with conditions. Miss Chen will remain as my guest during your search. Insurance, you understand, against any sudden attacks of conscience?" "No," Dominic said immediately. "That wasn't the deal. It is now," Petrov gestured, and his men moved closer to Amelia. "Don't worry. She'll be perfectly safe as long as you deliver what you've promised." As one of the men reached for her arm, Amelia jerked away. "I'm not going anywhere with you. You are," Petrov said pleasantly. "Unless you'd prefer I express my displeasure through other means, Mr. Blackwood, I'm sure, would hate to see you damaged." The threat hung in the air like poison. Amelia saw the desperation in Dominic's eyes, the way his hands clenched into fists he couldn't use. 1 week, she said quietly, looking directly at Dominic. "Find what you need to find." As Petrov's men escorted her toward the door, she heard Dominic call her name. She turned back one last time, memorizing his face, the shop that had been her world, the life that was slipping away like rain down a window. "I'll find you," he promised, his voice raw with emotion. "Whatever it takes, I'll find you." The door closed behind her with the soft chime of the brass bell, a sound that now seemed like a funeral dirge for everything she'd lost. 6 days later, Amelia sat in a penthouse prison that overlooked the city like a golden cage. The windows were bulletproof, the doors locked from the outside, and her only company was the silent woman who brought her meals and watched her with suspicious eyes. She'd spent the endless hours reading the books Petrov had allowed her to keep, including her grandmother's journals, searching for clues Dominic might have missed. But as the deadline approached, hope flickered and died like a candle in the wind. On the 7th morning, Petrov entered her gilded cell with news that turned her blood to ice. "Your Mr. Blackwood has been quite resourceful," he said, settling into the chair across from her breakfast table. "He's managed to locate several items of value. Unfortunately, not quite enough to satisfy his obligations." "How much is he short?" $800,000. Petrov's smile was patient, predatory. "A significant sum, but not insurmountable. I've made him a final offer." Amelia's hands trembled as she set down her coffee cup. "What kind of offer?" "He can walk away. Leave the country. Start fresh somewhere beyond my reach. All he has to do is abandon his foolish rescue attempt." The room spun around her. "And me? You remain as payment for his family's debts. You're young, intelligent, attractive. There are many ways you could be useful to my organization. He'll never agree to that, won't he?" Petrov leaned forward, his pale eyes glittering. "He's already cost me considerable time and money. How much do you think his affection for a struggling bookshop owner is really worth?" Before Amelia could respond, the sound of gunfire erupted from somewhere below. Petrov's expression shifted from smug confidence to sharp alertness as shouts echoed through the building. "It seems Mr. Blackwood has made his choice," he said, rising from his chair. "How disappointing." The penthouse door burst open, and Dominic strode in with 3 armed men behind him. But instead of rescue, Amelia saw something that shattered her heart. These weren't police or FBI agents. They were more of Petrov's people, and they had Dominic at gunpoint. "The legendary romantic gesture," Petrov said, gesturing for his men to lower their weapons. How refreshingly predictable. Dominic's eyes found Amelia's across the room. She saw everything in that single look. Love, desperation, and a terrible resolve that made her stomach clench with dread. "Let her go, Victor," he said quietly. "I have your money." "Ah, but you don't." Petrov moved to the window, gazing out at the city below. "You have to point 2 million in recovered artifacts. An impressive haul, but still short of our agreement. Then I'll make up the difference." "With what?" "You've mortgaged everything you own, called in every favor, sold every asset. What could you possibly have left to offer?" Dominic reached into his jacket and withdrew a single sheet of paper. As he placed it on the table, Amelia saw official letterhead, signatures, the weight of legal authority. "A confession," he said simply. "Every illegal transaction my grandfather ever made, every bribe, every stolen artifact, every deal with people like you. Enough evidence to bring down your entire operation." Petrov's composure cracked for the first time. "You wouldn't dare. I already have. The document is scheduled for automatic delivery to law enforcement agencies in 6 countries, unless I personally canceled the transmission in the next hour. You're bluffing. Try me." The silence that followed stretched like a wire about to snap. Finally, Petrov began to laugh, a sound like breaking glass. "Magnificent. You're willing to destroy your families. Legacy to save a woman you've known for less than 2 weeks. I'm willing to destroy my family's curse to save the woman. Love." The words hit Amelia like a physical blow. Love. He'd said it, simple and stark and true. In a room full of killers with everything to lose. "Unfortunately," Petrov continued, "your sacrifice is meaningless. Even if you expose my operations, even if you bring down my organization, I'll still have time to eliminate the evidence." Starting with Ms. Chen, one of his men moved toward Amelia, but she was already in motion. 6 days of helpless captivity had taught her something about desperation, about the moment when survival instinct overrides everything else. She grabbed the heavy crystal vase from the breakfast table and brought it down on the gunman's head with every ounce of strength she possessed. As he crumpled, she dove for his weapon, her fingers closing around cold steel just as the room erupted into chaos. "Nobody moves," she shouted, the gun steady in her hands despite her racing heart. "Nobody moves or I start shooting." Petrov raised his hands, but his smile never wavered. "You don't have the experience for this kind of standoff, my dear. Eventually, you'll make a mistake." "Maybe," Amelia said, backing toward Dominic. "But I don't have to be perfect. I just have to be desperate enough." In the confusion that followed, Dominic managed to reach the table where he'd left his confession. His fingers flew over his phone, canceling the automatic transmission with seconds to spare. "It's done," he said quietly. "The confession is withdrawn. Your secrets are safe. In exchange for what? Safe passage. For both of us. We walk out of here, and you never see us again." Petrov studied them with the calculating gaze of a predator weighing his options. Finally, he nodded to his remaining men. "Let them go. Just like that?" Amelia couldn't believe it was so simple. Just like that? Petrov smoothed his jacket, his composure restored. "You see, Mr. Blackwood has just reminded me why I prefer dealing with desperate people. They're so much more creative in their solutions." As they backed toward the elevator, Dominic's hand found Amelia's, warm and steady and real. The last thing she saw before the doors closed was Petrov's satisfied smile, and she realized with a chill that their victory felt too easy to clean. But as they descended toward street level and freedom, she pushed the thought away. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. "I meant what I said up there," Dominic whispered as they stepped into the rain-washed afternoon. "About loving you." "I know," she replied, squeezing his hand. "I love you too." They walked away from Petrov's building, hand in hand. 2 broken people who had found something worth saving in each other. Behind them, the penthouse windows reflected the sky. Empty and gleaming and full of possibilities neither of them dared to name. 6 months later, Pages and Dreams reopened in a new location. Financed by the legal sale of recovered wartime artifacts that had never belonged to Petrov's organization, Amelia stood behind her counter, watching Dominic arrange a display of first edition poetry, and marveled at the strange paths that had led them to this moment. They had paid the price for their freedom, but they had also discovered something more valuable than money or safety. They had learned that some things, once found, are worth any sacrifice to keep. The brass bell chimed as their first customer of the day entered, and Amelia smiled, ready to help another soul find exactly what they were searching for. The end.